yourself in this wonderful week of events we're having. Today we are hosting a masterclass with our very special guest of honor, Kate Barnow, moderated by screenwriter Daniela Leon. Please join me in welcoming here with us, Kate Barnow. And the masterclass host, Daniela Leon.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Kate Barnow. She told me I could remember it by either Barnow or Barnow, and it's something in the middle, which is the opposite, but it's a good way to remember it. And thank you for coming for the festival and to Tel Aviv. And how do you find Tel Aviv so far?
Oh, I love it so far. I haven't been here very long yet. I'm looking forward to exploring more of it, but so far it's been great.
Actually, yesterday when we met before this meeting, we were caught by the siren, the alarm, and I didn't know it was a drill. So I was like, okay. And then I thought it was very symbolic that the one who writes for House of Cards and True Blood is discovering Tel Aviv by that scene. So
I feel like I got an authentic experience.
Yes. So it's going to be a conversation, and then we're going to open the discussion for the questions from the audience. So write it down if you think you won't remember. Ariella, can you tell me please half an hour before? Sure. Wherever you are. Yeah, thanks. So let's start at the beginning, and please tell us what were your first steps into the screenwriting world, the industry?
Interesting. I mean, there are about 1,000 first steps. Every time you think you're taking your first step, it turns out to be years from your first step. But I originally started thinking that I wanted to just do screenplays for feature films, and I took a book that I'd actually been named after, this beloved book that my mom had always told me about, called Catherine, which was a 14th century British period piece. And decided to adapt that into a film, which was the least realistic thing you could possibly do as a starting screenwriter. It was a 1,200-page book, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to write a screenplay with this thing. And when I started, I realized it was going to take a while, so I needed a job. So just through a sort of series of people I knew, I got a job as an assistant on Will and Grace. And that meant that I was sort of typing, in Old English while all these gay puns were just sort of floating around. It was a pretty discordant way of working, but it was interesting because at the time, TV hadn't. It was just before TV was really sort of coming into the era that we now have of just this incredible television. I'd always loved dramatic television, but I didn't see it as being as sort of sophisticated as film, and of course it was all just beginning to change. It was right around the time that Sopranos was hitting, and after about 2 years of writing this absurd screenplay, it occurred to me that I didn't really want to do anything again for 2 years straight, and maybe television would be a good thing to do, and I'd been working in the comedy side of it, so maybe I could switch over to the drama. So I sort of took my first steps by the way that it's historically worked in Hollywood is in order to kind of get your feet in the door as a TV writer, you write what they call a spec script, which is a script of a show that already exists. And I chose to write a 6 Feet Under because I really liked the show at the time, and I thought that I could sort of write the voices of those characters well. So nervously, I sort of set about doing that, and when I had done that, and that took about, I want to say 6 months to a year to sort of write it, finish it, get it to people, that I realized that alone wasn't going to be enough to sort of get me entree into the world. I looked into finding jobs as an assistant in dramatic television, and those jobs are not easy to come by, even though they're not super fun, those jobs. I mean, sometimes they can be, but oftentimes you get paid very little for doing grunt work. And, but it took a while to find that job. So eventually, I got an assistant on a drama show called E-Ring, and I was working on my script simultaneously. And kind of you're hoping that someone will take you under their wing or mentor you, and that person doesn't come along that easily, and then you're hoping that maybe someone will read your writing and like it enough to say, let me give you a job, and that doesn't happen that easily. And so you kind of are forging ahead in a blind way. You don't know when your break is going to come, if your break is going to come. You're in a city where everybody's doing the same thing for the most part, trying to get discovered. So it can be very discouraging. I tried to stay focused best I could, and then I became what's called a script coordinator, which is a very clerical job. It's essentially you format the script for production. So when you're working on a TV show, you're the person that sort of goes through the scripts, makes sure there are no errors, makes sure that the continuity of the story is all working, and then you put out the different drafts that go into production. So you do all the scene numbers, you make sure all the different heads of department on the TV show have the information they need. Very, very clerical, kind of as far away from writing as you can get. But what I hoped was that I was just reading so many drafts of scripts that somehow through osmosis it was kind of getting into my system. And finally, after several years of doing these kinds of jobs, I got onto True Blood, which I had no reason to believe was going to be any different than the shows I'd been on prior to it, only that I was going to be working in the vicinity of Alan Ball, who I thought was so talented and I really wanted to learn from, and other writers that were incredibly talented. And I had no idea what True Blood was going to be. It was at the very beginning of the show, and you know, it was sort of this out there idea of a vampire show. It was before vampires had really become big, and it was Southern Gothic, but it was cable, and it was sophisticated, but it was also campy, and it was sort of like, huh, this is an experiment. Who knows? And then all these things sort of happened. Really, I have to just, for all the people out there that, you know, wonder how you know. You don't know. It's not like you feel like you're gaining momentum and you're just about there and you're gonna get your break. I had no idea that it was about to happen. I guess what happened was that I got desperate enough to really sort of ask. A couple of writers on the show came to me and to the writer's assistant, who is the person that writes the notes down in the writer's room, and said, you know, you guys, for season 2 of the show, we don't have that many writers. We may need an outside writer. You should really ask Alan Ball for a freelance script. And so we kind of, you know, mustered up our courage and we went to Alan, who's a lovely, lovely guy. But they're hard. I mean, to get these freelance scripts, they don't come easily. Lots of decisions go into making that. And we asked him, and he was very generous. He said, you know, just to explain, on a network show where there are 22 episodes a season, there are more scripts for people to write. On a show on HBO, there are 12 scripts a season, so there aren't that many to go around. So for him to give us one of 12 scripts for season 2 when the show was sort of becoming a hit was a big risk on his part. So he asked us to write a spec script of True Blood. And so Elizabeth and I, the writer's assistant and I, not knowing each other that well, went off, decided to break an episode in a hypothetical season 3, and we wrote that script as though it were an episode of the show. We gave it to Alan, sort of as an audition, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and I just thought, you know, my entire life was just hinging on his decision. And to some extent, I suppose it was. But he said yes, and he gave us our first script. So we got to write an episode of season 2 of True Blood and produce it. So for very, very young green writers, we got to do something that only very seasoned writers get to do. So it was a very big break, and it was very exciting.
Wow, what a start. So just to tell that, I don't know how many of you are screenwriters and are working at it, but the first position you said, screenwriter, writing coordinator for
yes,
it's kind of like Meneret Esrit, which is very technical, and not you. And then you wanted to do the real thing and to write down.
Exactly.
And so, what was the first time you were invited to the writers' room?
So when we were given the freelance script, we were then asked to come into the writer's room for most of season 2, because we were going to get episode 10, which was close to the end of the season, and in order to sort of track what was going to be happening in our episode, we needed to know what was coming before it. So we got to sit at the table in the writer's room, which had about 6 or 7 writers at the time, and sit quietly and listen and observe and try to take it in and learn as much as we could. We were still doing our other jobs at the same time, so we were sort of wearing 2 hats, playing writer half the day and the other day going and doing our job. But that was my first exposure really to the writer's room and how you put a season of television together.
So tell us again about elaborate about the writer's room, because in Israel we work differently.
Yes.
In Israel we have a head screenwriter, which is the Sridai Rashi or Rashid, and they give to the screenwriters either treatments and they write the chapter, or the screenwriters write their own treatments and script. But in the US it works really differently, and you have writer's room, which is tell us all about it, please.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the origin of the writer's room was. I want to say it began in the sitcom world, in the comedy world, where
Africa.
In Africa, everything started in Africa, of course. So I believe it kind of grew out of this need for people to be able to riff on each other's jokes, but I could be speaking out of turn there. The writer's room in America is as vast and varied as any sort of office workplace you can imagine in any place. Everyone gets to do it a little differently. I think people come to the room with the expectation that it'll be similar to the show they're on prior to it or to stories they've heard, but I would say every room I've been in so far has been very, very different. Some rooms do work similarly to the way you guys do it. They're head writers and they sort of have the vision and they sort of allot scripts out to writers, but ultimately it comes back to them. They do the polishes and the final drafts, and it's really their baby. Other rooms are much more collaborative, and True Blood was that way. Alan Ball, even though I would certainly argue he's a tremendous visionary, was very comfortable letting other people kind of go off and do their best work. And for the most part, because he's so permissive and he is so good himself, people really wanted to do their best work for him. And that was true across the board with all the departments on the show. So many of my closest friends are from True Blood because I was there for so many years, and it was a really lovely group of people. But everyone from the costume designer to the head of the art department to the editor to the directors, all the way on down through the crew, everyone wanted to do their best work on the show because of the tone that was set. So in the writer's room,
And what was the showrunner at that time?
Alan Ball was the showrunner at the time, yeah. So he
Please
was.
tell the audience what the showrunner is.
Oh,
actually,
yeah,
because
sure.
we're
Okay,
not
so
always-
typically the showrunner is the person who runs the writer's room and is the person who you send your script to when you've written your first draft, and who then is responsible for rewriting it, and basically is the person who has the final say on the writing.
the last computer.
The very last computer, typewriter, as it were, at some point. He's still subject to the notes from the studio or the network, but it's ultimately his vision. Sometimes you can get confused between the creator of the show and the showrunner. They don't necessarily have to be the same person, but oftentimes they are. Sometimes a person will create the show and not have a lot of experience running a show, and so they'll bring in someone else to do that, but they'll work very closely with the creator. So Alan Ball was the creator and the showrunner, which is great because he had such a clear he was the one who found the books and said this could make a great TV show, and just
The
had
books that it's based on.
Yeah, the books that the True Blood is based on is called The Sookie Stack House.
Vampire Diaries.
Yeah, I mean it's
Wow.
Vampire Mysteries.
something to that effect.
Yeah.
You didn't read the book.
No, I did. I just it's called something different everywhere.
You were young, you needed the money.
And I was young and I needed the money. If we remember that far back, it was like yesterday. But it was based on Charlene Harris's series of books about Sophie Stackhouse, and he picked it up, I think the story goes, at an airport one day, and just thought this would make a great TV show. And it's amazing that he thought that, because it's reading the books, you would never sort of just jump to, oh yeah, this would make a great series. But he did, and he was right. So.
The author of the series of books is still alive?
Is still alive. Her name's Charlene Harris, and she's still writing, and she's prolific. And
So clear she's a woman.
for sure. I mean, it was all just, you know.
Just a minute, how many of you saw True Blood? Okay, nice. And House of Cards?
So the room was, I think when I first went in there, probably seven people in total, writers, and all from different backgrounds in TV. Some of them
Africa.
From
Africa.
Everything goes back to Africa. The writers were all very, very encouraging of us, which was lovely, because you don't always get that. But they were so really just cheered us on the entire time. And True Blood's a funny show because it's got all kinds of tones to it. It's got an element of horror to it. It's got an element of campiness and humor to it. It's romantic. It's also can be very dramatic. So it's not an easy show to just sort of like copy. It took some time to get it. I'm not sure I ever totally got it, but the writers were really lovely in helping us get there. And that's when I sort of had my first writer's room experience. And the writer's room at True Blood was very different from the next show I went on to. True Blood was 7 writers. I went into a room after I did True Blood on a show called No Ordinary Family, which was on ABC. I would say...
Somebody watched that?
Yeah.
I would say that network shows tend to have slightly bigger rooms. I want to say there are about 13 writers in that room.
Tell us about the dynamic in that room, because it's half social skill. You need to have social skill.
Absolutely. It's really, I mean, if you look at any writer's room, the first thing you should sort of take into consideration is group dynamics. I mean, it's like any office space, you know, a group will take on sort of various archetypal roles. You know, like Lord of the Flies, there will be a, and I don't mean to be like so cynical about it because it can be such a lovely dynamic, but you know, you will have a scapegoat, you will have an alpha, and you will have all these people that sort of take on roles, and so it's not just sort of a free-for-all where you can sit down and just start, you know, being wildly, you can, it just won't work out that well for you. If you just start being wildly sort of like, I've been wanting to talk my entire life, and now's my chance, and you really have to sort of figure out what is needed from you, what the temperament in the room is, what is needed from that particular show, and at the beginning, it takes, I would say, it's almost the hardest learning curve in some ways. It takes several years to understand how rooms work. And it's a funny experience, because I think most writers think of writing as being by yourself behind a computer. And so to then go into basically a social situation and be creative is fairly counterintuitive. But for someone, I remember growing up, I never liked to collaborate. Whenever in school they would put us in groups, I'd be like, I don't like to talk with other people. And now I love it. I mean, it's changed me completely. I think it's the greatest. You can do such, for me, such better, more relaxed, more enjoyable work with the support of other people, if it's a good group dynamic. So I wouldn't do it any other way, but I do think there are questions as to whether it always lends itself to the best work. And I think there are shows that would suggest that one person's voice, one person's vision can create amazing shows. So there's no better way.
How does it work actually? You come every morning, you sit, the 7 writers, and and the one that types everything down. How did you call it?
The writer's assistant.
The writer's assistant.
Yeah.
Sounds good in English, but he only types.
Right. It's
He
true.
types with Ellen Ball
Yeah,
company. So
but you're
it's
still
a good job.
you're sort of stuck there typing, and you're not really encouraged to speak a ton because you're supposed to be focused on sort of what's being said, and there are so many voices that to get it all down, you really have to focus. That's a very, very tough job.
And what do you do? Like, okay, today we're gonna, at the beginning you start talking about the first season, the arc of the first season, then you split it to chapters. How does it actually work?
Somewhat like that, yeah. I mean, towards the beginning of, you come into the writer's room. Usually the room begins several months before production is even back at the office. You know, in TV you get a hiatus, so you may work 9 months of the year, you take 3 months off, you come back, and the writers start back and they sit down, and it's not unlike sitting down at your computer with a blank page. You're just like, okay, what's this season gonna look like? And hopefully people come to the table with some ideas and inspiration, but and that's usually the case. But oftentimes you'll start by saying, what do we want the arc of this season to look like? You know, if we have, take True Blood for example, if we have Sookie here starting at the beginning of season 2, where do we want to see her end of the season? Same for Bill, same for Eric. So you start looking at it through character, and you can chart out an arc, and invariably it'll change, you know, 1,000 times.
Arc in Hebrew is arc.
What is it in Africa? It's really sort of a test in endurance, because you can be so excited about one direction you're going and be committed to it and think that, you know, everyone on board is with you, and you can be, and then a million times throughout the season it can change, and you have to sort of, you know, call an audible, which is a football term, American football, and switch it up completely. So, but you go along according to this, you know, blueprint of where you're heading, and then once you have a sense of where you're sort of heading, then you start to break each episode by episode.
So a few meetings are about the arc, and then the further meetings are about every chapter.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you bring up stories and ideas about how the chapter is going to look like.
Yeah.
And then somebody has been chosen to write it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So you can go into breaking episode 1, and you can know that, you know, Jim is going to write episode 1, Angela's going to write episode 2, Brian's going to write episode 3, and you start breaking the episodes, and then say Jim, Angela, and Brian go off and they write their episodes, and then everyone comes back into the room. They come back with their first drafts. You read everyone's first drafts. You see if they're syncing up. You then give everybody notes based on not only the direction of the season, but based on just the scenes. If you think the scenes are working, if you hear the voices correctly, if you think this is funny, if you don't like it. So you have to deal with a certain amount of criticism and good feedback, things like that.
And you read it at home and then feedback it by mail, or you read it?
Depends. You can, sometimes people will send their notes by mail, but oftentimes you'll do it in the room.
You do a reading, like reading it up? No?
Well, you mean reading it out loud?
Yeah.
Well, no, people will go home and read it on their own, and then come back the next day, and you'll kind of go page through page and get notes. And some rooms are different about this. At True Blood, we would go around, everybody would be open to sort of give notes through the pages. On a show I just came off of, you do very, very general notes in the room from the writers, and it would be the showrunners that would really, I had 2 showrunners on the last show I was just on, the showrunners that would really give you notes. And they give you the chance to then go and do a second draft. So you go, you implement the notes, you change things according to everyone's takeaway from the first script. And then once you've done your second draft, it can go one of 2 ways. You can either be the person that continues to do the revisions on the draft as you go into production, or you can give, you can get fired. That is an option that I wasn't listing, but that's totally an option. Or you could then give the script over to the showrunners, and they will have responsibility for it from then on out. So it's not uncommon if you're a writer on a TV show and it's not your show, to write a script, and by the time it goes to shoot, it looks nothing like the script you wrote. That's a very common experience.
But you got your name on it.
But your name is usually on it, and you usually get paid for it. So you take what you get. Yeah.
So you want to tell us what you prepared for us to see?
Oh yeah. Okay. So
If you all wanted to be a fly on the wall in the writer's room, so this is your chance.
it's not. I picked this because it's actually an example of a not particularly cohesive set of notes that I had to write a scene using. So some rooms will break down every beat within a scene, and you can go off and you can really have a sense of what they want from you. Some rooms really want the writer to basically dream it up, and so they give you a sort of loose sense of what the scene is about, kind of what the directives are, where you want to get to, but not how to do it. So in the final season of True Blood, I remember this particular scene was one
Seventh season.
seventh season. This particular scene was one in which I had a lot of work to do, which is something that people will say, like, what's the work this scene is doing? And the work the scene was doing was we had to break Jason and Jessica up, and they had had this rotation throughout the series. And we knew that a lot of the fans actually wanted to see them come together. And they had just had a love scene in the episode prior to this episode, and we had to do very quick work in breaking them up, making it feel natural. And I was a little scared to do it. I didn't know what was going to make them break up. And so we talked about it a little bit in the room. And just keep in mind, the work I needed to do was I needed to get Jason in the direction of wanting a family, and Jessica in the direction of being more independent. They both love each other, but they're not going to be together. So it felt like a sort of a hard thing to do. So these were the notes that I got from the room that I had to work with when I went home by myself. So let's see here. And there's profanity. This is True Blood, so just so you know. It's that point where you find you're better friends than lovers. I love you too much, and everything I do sexually messes things up. But we want to feel good about him. Talking about Jason. We want them to both acknowledge what it was. What was it? We're asking the question because maybe we don't know. It was a beautiful friendship. It was what they both needed, and they both are relieved with each other. Beautifully ambiguous kiss. We agreed that we wanted an ambiguous kiss. So I have certain kind of we like this, yes. Then we start to worry about what our audience will think.
Maybe for the one person that didn't see True Blood, maybe you should tell us in one sentence. It's about this girl having powers.
Yes, it's about this girl, Jessica, who was made a vampire she was a human teenager. She was made a vampire in season 1. And we've sort of seen her evolution, struggling with what it means to be both vampire and she's got a lot of humanity to her. We've seen her evolution probably in some ways, throughout the 7 seasons. She's very relatable. And she's, throughout the series, had these different romantic episodes with Jason, who is our beloved yet very dumb Jason Stackhouse brother, Sookie. And he's sweet as can be, but always getting himself into trouble. And usually it has to do with his dick, which is what you're about to see in these
notes. All the series deals with the question, what if, which is the first question in the screenwriting, what if vampires would live among us in a legal way?
Yes, that's exactly the thesis of the show, right? It's a very.
So where is his dick?
Where is his dick? Let's see. There it is. I have to stop making bad decisions, but we feel like most of the trouble he's in started with his dick. And this is true. Jason's always getting into trouble with ladies, sometimes with men too. But oftentimes he's very seductive, and it gets him into a lot of trouble. So we're trying to move him towards the end of the series in the direction of someone who actually wants a family, is growing up. So you can see the notes are kind of vague, and oftentimes this is the kind of thing that you'll get at the end of the day. You'll be in the conversation in a writer's room, and you'll be following it, and you think it's very rich and fertile ground, and you feel like you know how you're going to write it, and then you get home and you get these notes. And
who wrote those notes?
This would have
been
Alex Sobatowski, our writer's assistant, who was very good at his job, It's just that when you talk about something, it all sort of, it sort of crystallizes in your mind, but it's not necessarily that fleshed out loud. And so when you go home and you start to think about how you're going to write the scene, you realize you don't have that much. And that's, that's just the writing process. So I would say at the beginning, if I would have gone home with these notes, say, my first time on True Blood, I would have had a total panic attack. By the time I had done this a couple of times, I knew that this was going to be a difficult scene, but that I could maybe get it there. I was pleasantly surprised with the scene that we're about to show you. If we could see the next scene, because what ended up happening, and this was really a testament to the characters and to the show, was that I had heard the characters' voices so well by the time we were in season 7, and the actors that played both characters were they brought so much to the scenes that it almost ended up writing itself. I'm not saying it's a brilliant piece of writing, but it happened much more easily than I thought it would. So we can play the scene or we can show the script. Which would you prefer? Which do you think is your fault? All right, we'll just skip to the scene. This is what ended up happening. Get out of the way.
Well, that went pretty well. I gotta stop making bad decisions, Jess.
Now, speaking of decisions, about the other night.
Oh, that's not what I meant.
No, I know you didn't.
I never thought anything we ever did was a bad decision. Except when I betrayed you. Or shot you. What gotten you locked up in a prison camp?
You know, the funny thing is, I never felt betrayed by you. Not even when you were being a dick.
Well, that's good, I guess. Well, this is because you never took me seriously to begin with.
No, Jason, that is not it. It's just, how our paths crisscrossed in the time.
I know what you mean. Seeing you with Hoyt tonight brought it all back for me. Just how complicated things are between us,
I'll be real honest with you.
Please.
I actually feel like our relationship is one of the least complicated in my life. Really. When I look back on us, I think about all the times that you were there for me. And you gave me exactly what I needed. The exact moment that I needed it.
Kind of like the other night. I feel like when we're together, we're in a little bubble, just floating above the ground. And I know we can't stay there, but it makes coming back down to earth feel better. What do you call that?
No, there's an official name. Well, why don't we think of it as like a beautiful picture?
Yeah.
I should go be with you.
You should. Hey, Jess. I'm here for you. If you need me.
different it is what was aired than what was written.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't see. Don't you have track changes? Because don't you have this ability to track changes, and then you see in red? I heard one person gave to one of the networks in Israel a document, and then he got all of it back in red, and only
Yes.
one word stayed the same because everything was changed by them.
I
And here it's
believe it.
very mild. It's very
Well, yes, actually, strangely, the few notes I got ended up translating into a scene that didn't get changed very much, but that's not always the case. There have been many scenes that have gone through so much red ink that you wouldn't even know what to make sense of anymore.
and then you have the second draft. And,
Yes,
and that
so-
was the one. Maybe we'll just look at it to see
Yeah, we
how
can look at
it's-
the script
Can
just
we
so you
see
can
the,
see it.
look at the other document?
Yeah, it's a lot like what was shot. Interestingly, I have about 1,000 examples of things that went through changes, and it looks nothing like what was shot. So maybe I should have brought that. But this really did stay, and again, I really believed it was. I mean, one of the great joys of working on a TV show that goes for several seasons is you get to know the voices of the characters very well. You get to know how the actors are going to respond to the material, and I would argue that this scene was all Ryan Quanten and Deborah Ann Wall. I mean, they just brought so much to the scene, and that's interestingly, when I started out writing, I didn't realize that was going to be one of the great joys of working in television, is that collaborative process, not just in the writer's room, but then on set with the actors, especially the actors on True Blood. They were so incredibly smart and collaborative, and always brought sort of fresh attitude to stuff that really could have been so kind of saccharine and silly, and so yeah, so that was kind of as you go through your career in TV, you have many different experiences, but that was as good as I think it gets in terms of an experience all around.
This meeting called Secrets from the Writing Room. So please give us your secrets for writing a good scene. Like, what do you think it's really essential to be in a good scene that you write?
That's tough. If I knew that. Trying to give a really
Except
thoughtful
of
answer.
conflict and change and.
I think change is a really interesting thing that I didn't know when I was a younger writer, which is to sort of surprise yourself, to think that you're on one trajectory in the scene, and then to sort of have something from left field come at you, and to then have to deal with that in the scene. But I'm gonna have to think about the one ingredient. Check back with me in like 20 minutes. We'll see if I've come up with
Tomorrow,
something.
with
Yeah.
you have that. I think I have B in my eye. Can you go? Okay, finish with it, no? So the next writer's room you've visited, you attended, is House of Cards.
Yes, House of Cards.
And tell us about that experience.
Well, House of Cards was very different from True Blood because it didn't have, well, obviously it didn't have vampires and supernatural abilities. And the thing about, and I'm actually being honest here, the thing about anything that's genre is you can sort of solve most problems, any storytelling problems, with like a superpower. And that it can really mean that you make bad TV, because it becomes pretty facile and easy. But it is always a solution if you're like stumped at the end of the day and you're like, how do we get out of this? And we're just like, so he shoots light out of our hand. You don't have that option when you're working in Washington, D.C. You can, but it's a very different show. So House of Cards
You have
was...
him pointing to the audience, breaking the
yes,
fourth
we were
wall.
breaking the
It's-
fourth wall. So we came into House of Cards knowing that we had a couple of well, it was interesting. It had been a show in the UK around 1990, right after Margaret Thatcher had left office. It was a very cynical time in British politics. And it hit in America at around a similar time of cynicism. And we knew we were going to be breaking the fourth wall, which was something that the decision to do that had been made before I came onto the show with the people that were creating the show, and those people were David Fincher, and Kevin Spacey was part of that, a few other non-writing producers, and then Bill Williman, who was the showrunner, the writing showrunner. And so we knew we were going to do that, and we were all worried that it was going to be risky, because we're such a sophisticated TV audience now. Audiences are so smart that the idea of someone just sort of facing the camera and addressing you could go one of two ways. We felt like if anyone could do it, it would be Kevin Spacey, and he was just coming off of a world tour of Richard III, where it was essentially the same character, where he'd been addressing the audience at huge theaters across the world. We thought, okay, this guy's got it. He's going to be fine with this particular mechanism, but you never know. I mean, especially on a first season of TV, you take major swings and you have no idea how they're going to land. So in the House of Cards writers' room, we had to familiarize ourselves with very sort of nitty-gritty political details. Even the most staunch politicos in the room had to sort of get familiar with things about bills and certain protocol and things that happen only if you're working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. So we took a trip to Washington, D.C. We met with a lot of people there, insiders, lobbyists, actual politicians, staffers, kind of got a taste of that. And then the big thing that we had to sort of land on, and everyone was coming from different political points of view and different levels of passion about the political system, we had to land on the fact that it was going to be a very cynical show, and that ultimately these characters were not going to be quote-unquote likable, which is hard because we're all sort of used to having at least one likable character in our stories. I mean, growing up, you read stories about people that you identify with. All of our lives, we've watched things with people that even if we don't love them, there's something about them that we can identify with, connect with. That was not necessarily going to be the case for these characters, Frances and Claire Underwood, and that was a real paradigm shift for all of us to kind of get used to. And in that regard, though, the showrunner was really, really a true leader because he stayed very firm on that point. I would come in and I'd say, like, psychologically, I just don't see how Frances could behave this way. And he's like, well, this is not about psychological realism. And I'm like, well, how do you write if it's not about that? He just basically said, figure it out, and so I had to really put on a new hat and flex a different muscle. And it was really important and it was a really interesting lesson for me to learn that you don't have to actually understand your character in order to write them. So that became a show much more about trickery and cat and mouse, and it was character. It was very complicated and nuanced. It was character driven, but not in the way that like Jessica and Jason were, which was those two had hearts and you could feel them beating, and you know how to write from that place. Even if not specifically, intuitively. Nothing intuitive about Frances Underwood unless you're like him, in which case I applaud you. But that was really hard to try to get into the mind of someone that was that Machiavellian. So you had to really put a lot of heart and emphasis into the machinations of the plot and the twists and the turns. And it didn't necessarily make for the most compelling scripts because you didn't really know how it was going to feel or come out until the actors really got a handle of the information. And unlike other shows I'd worked on, we wrote all the scripts before we went into production. So you didn't get the feedback while you were writing. You didn't get to see dailies or clips coming in to see how the actors were responding to the scripts. We wrote all of them before we then headed to Baltimore and shot the entire season of TV. So that was like, I want to say a year and a half before it actually aired. And I think we all knew that there was something special there because it was just such an incredible group of people that were working on the show. Something good was going to come from it. But I don't think anyone expected there to be quite the response that people had in terms of eating these characters up and loving sort of the deliciousness of how evil it was. So
think that it broke a lot of rules, like the anti-hero we're used to, like as you said in The Sopranos, it started a new stream of anti-hero. It doesn't have to be a good one. In House of Cards, both of them are conniving, the couple, which is like a monster we do it, but it works wonderfully. And the trick I think you use is that he addresses the audience, and then you have to identify with him. He's like your friend now.
Makes a huge difference.
This animal is addressing you.
It's your animal.
Yeah, it's your animal. It's your pet.
Yeah.
And in the meeting in the writers' room of this series, Kevin Spacey was there.
Did Kevin Spacey, I'm trying to remember if Kevin Spacey came by. No. He may have stopped by one day when I wasn't there. But I got to, hang out with him a lot on set in Baltimore, and he's as smart an actor as, there is. He's a brilliant guy. And he can take really mediocre dialogue and just turn it into genius. He's brilliant. So, if you're gonna write bad dialogue, you might not want to give it to Kevin Spacey, but then you may also, because he's gonna turn it into something much better than you ever started with. And that's true for Robin Wright as well.
Were you on the set on that?
I was. So that show is shot in Baltimore, and we wrote the season at the beginning for about 9 or 10 months in Los Angeles, and then the writing staff actually relocated to Baltimore, Maryland, and I was there for 5 months while we shot the show. So really I was immersed in it, because you're leaving home, you're leaving everything that's familiar to you, you're in a new city, and I didn't really know many people in Baltimore, and so your life becomes the show. And it wasn't a proven entity. This was the first season of the show, and no one knew that Netflix was making an original show. So I'd tell people that I was away working on something, and they'd be like, "Oh, what are you working on?" I was like, "A new Netflix show." They're like, "The DVD company?" And I'm confused. Yeah, they're coming out with original programming. And they're like, "How am I gonna watch that?" Through my computer? Yeah. Wait and see, it's gonna be huge. Sure enough, that's what happened. But it really, people just thought I was like they thought I was working on like webisodes at the beginning, and that was fine, but it was so far from it. I mean, it was a huge budget. The sets were absolutely glorious. You had these incredible actors, and we were in the middle of not even Maryland. We were in a town called Edgewood, Maryland, which is just off the main highway on these sound stages that had once been some kind of factory that David Fincher came along, and he saw that and he said, "Oh, these are going to be our stages. Start making them into sound stages." And they turned into these incredible sound stages where they're still making the show now. So, yeah.
It's supposed to be a 4th season?
It's supposed to be a 4th season, yeah.
And what is it? Do you know what he was the president? So
I don't know what happened. They keep it once you're no longer in the inner circle. They keep the information for you as well. It's guarded very heavily. Yeah.
So the work on that show was somehow different from True Blood. It's like you were
different. Well, obviously for the obvious reasons, it was very different tone, very different subject matter.
It's to do adaptation for another series.
Yep.
Based on the book.
Based on the book, that's right. Which, in that regard, wasn't that dissimilar from True Blood. We sort of departed from the original series of House of Cards, much the same way we departed from the books in True Blood. We held on to certain things, and then slowly but surely, sort of the show becomes its own thing, and you let go of the old material. So in that regard, it was sort of the same, but very different set of characters. First of all, Netflix had never done TV before, so they were very hands-off. HBO is also very hands-off, but Netflix even more so, because they just entrusted the writers completely with the process.
What did they read? They read the treatments, the drafts of the scripts?
Netflix probably read the treatments and the scripts, but I'm not sure that they gave notes. If
Really?
they did, I wasn't privy to them. They were really, really hands-off. Yeah, I mean, they really trusted the creatives that they gave the control to. But also, I think part of it was that David Fincher, who was obviously a very seasoned filmmaker, I think went with Netflix because he liked that they were so willing to sort of just say, you take it. He didn't want to go somewhere where he was going to be noted. He knows his process. He knows how he likes something to be, and he wanted that freedom, which a lot of people do want. I mean, it's considered sort of the great gift of TV and of very specific networks that do TV. I mean, it's one of the reasons that people seek out HBO and now seek out Netflix and different channels, because they will give you a tremendous amount of freedom, which is less and less true in the film world. So a lot of filmmakers have now come to television because TV is such a writer's format. So
And to cables, not the networks.
yeah, more to cable. I mean, I think networks occasionally give a lot of freedom to very specific writers, but it's much less frequent. And they have a lot more people to answer to, ultimately, the network does.
So we have the Ewan. Oh, so let's open it up. Let's open up for questions. Who want to ask what? Please introduce yourself, full name, and stand up.
My name is Adi Anhang, and I'm a senior. Hello. My name is Adi Anhang, and I'm a senior in Ariel University. I'm right now writing my thesis about queer characters in vampire shows.
Great. You're writing about True Blood.
One of them is True Blood, another one is Buffy. And I noticed a lot that queer characters are often written stereotypically, usually the fun gay friend or the annoyed lesbian friend or whatever. And True Blood as a show introduced a lot of amazing queer characters. Lafayette and Tara and Pam and so on. How did you go into writing them, trying not to stereotype them, making them their own people? Well, technically they're not people, but...
Right. Not carbon cutouts of gay characters. It's a great question, and
You didn't say my questions were great.
no, I'm not sure yours were, but it's a good question, actually, because some of that really was just born from Alan Ball's mind. I mean, he was really responsible for Lafayette. Nelson Ellis was really responsible for Lafayette. He there was a rule. I mean, it wasn't announced often, but it was a rule that everyone was aware of, which was that all the characters in the show, and they were all incredibly respectful actors, would do their lines according to what was on the page, but Nelson could really improvise. And a part of that was because he channeled something, and just to be clear in terms of how just brilliant an actor he is, he's a heterosexual man, you know, so he just came to Lafayette, and for those of you who haven't seen True Blood, Lafayette was a character. He's an African-American male who is gay, but he's very masculine, but he's also cross-dressing. He sort of just, you know, is whoever he wants to be, and breaks sort of the mold of all kinds of things that had never really been seen on TV before. That was really a great example of the right people at the right time, because it took a place like HBO to not worry about this character, but it also took a mind like Alan Ball to come up with this character, and then it took a great actor like Nelson to embody that character. And then I would say, to carry on that character, it took writers that were in love with that character. And that's, you know, that is one of the things that I think I take for granted, especially that's what you do when you're in an environment for so long, is you assume everyone sort of has the same values and way of looking at the world as you do. And because what happened with True Blood was I was there at the beginning, and then I left, did a House of Cards, and then I came back. Did a couple of other shows as well, and I came back. And in the time that I was gone, and in the time since True Blood's ended and I've gone away, I've realized that's right. Not everyone can write for a character like Lafayette or Pam or Eric. I mean, True Blood was amazing because vampires are considered just like pansexual. They really, in order to sort of, they've got tremendous libidos and they're all id, and in order to make it through thousands of years of being an other, they'll sort of have sex with whomever. And that's just something you come to know in the lore of True Blood. But you do take it for granted if you've been in that world for a long time, that not everyone can get comfortable writing those kinds of characters. So, does that answer the question a bit?
I'm Maya Baja, and I just wanted to ask if someone has an idea for a series that they would like to try and realize, then how would they go about doing that in the United States? And also, I wanted to ask, what was your favorite show to work on? Because I hear shows in plural. We already know House of Cards and True Blood, so I was just wondering.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll start with the second one. In total now I've worked on True Blood, No Ordinary Family, which was a superhero show on ABC, House of Cards, and then I just came off of a show for Netflix called Marco Polo, which is about Marco Polo in 13th century China. And I would really say each one of them they've been all so different, and each one of them has had something incredibly special about them. I've gotten really lucky with the shows I've been on. The one that I keep coming back to so often is True Blood because it's sort of where I got my start, and it's where I stayed the longest, so I have sort of the most range of experience. If we had more time, I could just sort of tell you about all the things that I loved about each show. As for your first question, it's a hard thing to answer because it used to be, I would say, and I still think of myself as a fairly new writer, so I don't have 20 years experience. I have 6 years experience. But it used to be that you had to be on a writing staff and be a very seasoned writer in order to go and pitch your own TV show ideas. In the last 10 years or so, there are numerous examples now of people that have never worked in TV before that are either coming from the feature side of the business or just, coming out of school or whatever it may be, that have an idea for a show and they find someone to pitch it to. It somehow makes its way to a studio or a network and it gets bought as an idea, and before you know it, that show's happening and they have no TV experience. And that's not a problem in and of itself because they'll, bring in a seasoned showrunner. So there are ways. Sure, thanks. There are ways to do it. I'm just not really sure how. There are these people that are way more industrious than I ever was. But, usually it starts with, it helps to have an agent, and that's the sort of age-old, how do you get an agent? They often want you to have your own first job, but how do you get a job if you don't have an agent? So that's a tough one. Everyone struggles with that. But certainly there are just ways to kind of get to producers. Oftentimes managers will listen to ideas from people that they don't necessarily represent. I'm sure there's a way to cold call an executive at a studio or a network and say, I have this idea, I'd love to get it to you. I think any way under the sun. But as I say, there are people that are way more industrious than I am. And I've always sort of just followed the straight and narrow path. And I'm just starting myself to go out to try to sort of develop my own ideas. And it's very hard because you think you have an idea that is really clear and crystallized, and you're relaying it to people, and you're like, oh, this is a TV show, we're going to see that. But people can't necessarily see it if it's not on the page. So, and then there's always the option of you can write a script, you can write a pilot script, and sometimes that works better because rather than having to explain a premise of an entire series and that you risk people not understanding it or seeing the vision of it, you hand them a 50-page document. I actually have a friend who did it this way, which is very interesting. has anybody seen the show The Affair, which is on Showtime?
Yeah.
So my friend Sarah Treem, who we worked together on House of Cards, she knew that the premise of the show was simple enough that it might get lost, the nuance of it might get lost in just pitching it as like a, 5-minute log line. And so she wrote it as a script. She thought the pilot script itself would sell it much better. And she did that. She wrote the script. Granted, she had a track record as a writer, which is helpful, but she sold it as a script. And I think that is a perfect example of a sort of, I don't want to call it low concept because it's a very sophisticated idea, but it wasn't, it was sort of a basic idea about human relations, and those are the kinds of ideas that are hard to sell in a room. A guy and a girl having an affair.
This is an example for a high concept. It's the affair is.
Well, with the way that they tell it, yes, but the actual subject matter itself, it's not sort of like creating, recreating the wheel. It's just a guy and a girl have an affair. Right, so she wrote as a script, and in the writing of the script they said, oh, this is much more than just that. And that's when there was a bidding war, and different people wanted it, and it became the show that it is now.
So according to your question, when you will have your idea that you want to pitch, you will take it to Ellen Ball or...
Yeah, you can take it to, so there are a bunch of different options. You can take it to...
one of the show?
Well, yes, so there are all these writers that have their own production companies that are looking to have partnerships with someone like yourself who has a great idea, and you can pitch it to them. You can go directly to the people that make the shows, studios and networks. You can try to link up with someone who has a track record as a writer, as a producer. So there are different venues. It's just, trial and error.
Hi, I'm Ori Kagan, third year in Tel Aviv University, film studies. I was wondering about more of the script writing aspect of something you talked about earlier when you said American term of ball from the left field. When your own writing surprises you, well, I would like to, if you can elaborate on that process when you're stuck with something and suddenly the script speaks back, or the characters speak back, and what goes through with all that. And maybe also I was wondering if you're ever going to go back to that 12th century novel.
Oh. I find it really hard to talk about the writing process because I feel like I sound like a crazy person. It's so mercurial, and I don't know how you know when something is working, and oftentimes I don't. For me, I can often think that I've written, the worst scene in an entire script will be the one that people think is the best in the entire script, and so I don't trust my judgment at all. I'm not sure that that's a good thing. I think it would be nice to have a little bit more confidence in my judgment, but it hasn't hindered me. So you should not feel like being lost in a scene or being lost in a script necessarily means that it's not good. Just because you don't know exactly if it's working doesn't mean that it's not working. I do think that as you do it more, you just get more comfortable knowing when you're on the right track. And I guess I always go back to what work is this scene doing? You set out to write something that has a feeling, has some nuance, goes in some different directions, but ends up somewhere. Is it sort of doing that? And if it's not quite there, can you do something to get it there without it feeling too written? You sort of have all these little litmus tests that you try to pass, and then hopefully by the time you've gotten to the end of all those tests, you've got something that's workable. The 12th century novel. So it's something that actually I have continuously gone back to, especially since I think it would work best now, really, as a miniseries. I don't think it's best as a feature film. And when I was writing it, I thought that too, but it was at a time when no one was making miniseries, and now they are more and more. So I've gone through different processes with that. I've spoken to the guy in the UK who actually owns the rights, and he's been trying to get it made with the BBC for many years, and over the years people have wanted to make it. 1,000 times, and for every different reason under the sun, it hasn't gotten made yet. So it's still something that's really kind of on my my wish list. It's just, thank you. Yeah, it's a complicated one.
By the way, you answered the open questions now. But how will you write a good scene? So you answered him. What you promised to answer me?
Which one?
How to write a good scene? What is the elements of
Oh,
good
right, I was
scene?
gonna come back
You made
to.
it, yeah.
Oh, man.
You don't have to come tomorrow to the Abner.
Oh, man.
You can. Yes.
Hi, Jonathan from the Writers Guild.
Hi.
I sort of wanted to come back a bit to the main subject of the writer's room. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit about the power dynamics in the writer's room, because we've heard a lot about how great it is, but then what happens when two writers in a room don't agree?
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, or get into like a really severe disagreement.
Yeah, you know, it can be a very difficult environment. Of course, you've got people with passion and some people really don't back down. And I've been in rooms before where the showrunner actually thinks it's best if people argue and butt heads, and that brings out the best work. So it's almost encouraged to be sort of argumentative. And so it happens a lot that people clash, and it really depends on how you are as a person. I mean, I've seen people that would rather scorch the earth and have no friends but get their idea on the board or on the page. And I'm probably on the other side of that spectrum in the sense of I don't like to see bad work happen. No one likes that. But I recognize that I'm part of a group, and that I think it's always important to know what one of the writers I worked with on House of Cards uses this question a lot. I'm not going to die on that hill. What are the things that you're willing to kind of go to the mat for? And so you have your priorities. You know, you have certain things that you may get really, really impassioned about, and other things you're like, that one's not worth fighting about. But you do have to continue to work with these people, and what you ultimately want is an environment where you will lift each other up and help each other creatively. And so if it becomes too contentious, it doesn't really work in anyone's favor, I believe, unless it's the kind of room in which you can really duke it out, and at the end of the day, everyone can just let it go. And those kinds of rooms exist too. So it's like any group dynamic. You can have any sort of variation of a theme that you've seen in life.
Hi. Hello? Ori, hello is my name. Writer. I wanted to ask about the main themes, two questions. How important is it, or how much is it, are the themes discussed that have been developed by the showrunner in terms of the room, developing of characters, plot, and story? And also, if you could elaborate on the development period, either of a show or of a season, depends which.
Okay, so the first question was specifically about theme?
About the themes, the main themes that the showrunner comes in with. I mean, obviously the vision that he has some sort of idea of what he wants to bring across, and then he has to bring the other writers on board, right?
Right.
So,
it's so true. I mean, so much of it is about community. One thing I've become so interested and intrigued by with the whole process of the TV making process is communication, because you can have a situation in which you are communicating beautifully in the writer's room, and all the writers are on the same page, and then you go onto the set, and you think you're on the same page as your actors and your crew, and they're reading the exact same scripts as the ones you were reading in the writer's room, but they're not getting the same thing from it. So theme is really, really important, and some people, emphasize it more than others, but it's hugely important for me, and I actually like to. One of the tricks in terms of writing a scene, if I'm really, really lost, is I'll always go back to theme. I'll say, what is the theme of this episode? And it could be an episode that is not cohesive at all. And my challenge will be like, I have to come up with a theme for this episode because that will make it cohesive. That's how I can sort of organize my own mind. But I do think that the best shows are the ones that the theme stays very consistent. I mean, I think that's the reason we go back to some of my favorite shows, Friday Night Lights, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, thematically very consistent. So it allows the plot to kind of go everywhere, but you always come back to a theme. But again, how you communicate that, that's, some people are very, very good at that. Some people, not as much, and it can be very frustrating. You think it's just sort of an understood thing, and sometimes it just, poof, just evaporates. And what was your second question?
The development process of a show or a season, whatever you can elaborate on in terms of how it works.
Yeah, well, I mean, development at the network level, at the studio level, can be very long. It can be as short as, thank you. It can be as short as like someone goes in to pitch a series in November of 2014, and by 2015 the script has been written and they're starting to shoot the pilot, so just a couple of months. But a show, I'm not sure it was in development per se all these years, but a show like Game of Thrones was at HBO before they made the pilot for 7 or 8 years. So they were mulling it over. Is this the right show? Is it, thematically working? Is it firing on all cylinders? And you can imagine. I mean, I'm sure those guys were sitting with that show, waiting for the phone to ring for like the first year or two, and then after like year 3, they were like, "This is never going to happen." By year 7, they were like, "This is never going to happen," and then it turns into Game of Thrones. So, it's just a wild ride that way. In terms of when a show is already up and running, and the writers' room goes to the room to sort of get the season started. I mean, it's different for all shows, but again, like on a Netflix show, when you write all 10 episodes, 10 or 13 episodes before you even go into production, you get months and months and months to sit with these episodes before you're shooting anything. On a show that's on network, you'll start in June and you'll need to start shooting your first episode by September, and then you're on a very, very quick schedule. So it just depends on if you personally, it depends on the logistics and the production schedule first and foremost, but in terms of personal desires, some people like the feedback of what they're seeing from the actors and from the production of the script itself, and some people love to sit in the pot with their stuff cooking for 10 months at a time before you see one frame.
In House of Cards, did you shoot the pilot first?
No, everything was actually
Everything.
shot after it
Usually
had all been written, which was very unusual.
Unusual. Usually, in other series, you shoot one pilot, which
Yeah.
is like shooting a feature by all means, like money-wise and everything,
Yeah.
and then and then do all the other stuff.
Correct. So oftentimes you'll shoot the pilot, everyone will get a sense of whether or not they think it's working, then it'll be ordered to series, and then all the writers will gather and start to break the other episodes of that season, and then you'll go into production on those.
Yeah. On House of Cards, you deal with a lot of issues that are politically on the line. I mean, a lot of people don't usually speak about it, or you cross some red lines that people usually tend not to go through. And even though it's well known that a lot of people accept it, even though it's the same people that wouldn't talk about these issues. So I was wondering, when you're designing the characters or the themes, how do you use technically, and which tools do you use to make people connect to these characters, even though they wouldn't accept these ideas without that type of writing?
I think that the conceit of House of Cards was that the more controversial, the more intriguing it was going to be. And I think one of the dangers now in television, because so many lines are getting crossed, whether it's a political show or just everyone's trying to sort of outdo each other in craziness, is that we're getting desensitized to seeing almost anything. And so one of the challenges, I think, is to pull back or to make things truly, truly extraordinary because they're based in character, and you believe. And I think that's one of the things that House of Cards does well, is it feels like it's set in a very sort of like real political environment. You believe that this is the milieu of politics, and then you see things that you've never seen before in the political landscape. But I think with so many shows being made and so many people trying to push the envelope of what's acceptable, you can do anything now, really. Say anything, show anything. It's a challenge to make that mean something. I'm curious, did anybody see the British show Black Mirror? Yeah. I mean, because it had been a long time. I just saw it this last year, but it had been a long time since my jaw had sort of dropped. You know, I mean, you sit in a writer's room, you hear people just pitch wild ideas all the time, and so it's hard to watch TV at the end of the day and be like, oh, that's crazy. I mean, you've heard it. You've heard everything under the sun. And so that first episode of Black Mirror, I thought, whoa, I was just speechless. I was stupefied. And I think that is rarer and rarer. You have to find more and more clever ways to tell your story. And you do that really well.
Just another thing, and you maybe cross the border even further for people to think that it's not likely to happen, and then they accept it. I mean, specifically on House of Cards or maybe on other places, when you take the personal interest, say in politics, and you push it even further, maybe it helps other people to accept it because they say it's too obscene or other things that allows them to do it.
Allows the
viewers to accept it because it goes too far, so it's not a...
I mean, I think it's an interesting barometer we're playing with. I mean, I think a lot of people came to House of Cards thinking it was going to be a sort of heady show. They thought it was a sort of fancy show. I think people were like, oh, this is intellectual, it has Kevin Spacey in it, it's about politics, and then people were like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming at all. And so, but that doesn't mean that it's good. I mean, which is not to say that I don't think it is. I just think that, you know, how you set the expectations and then how you pay them off is part of it. But for, I think, a show or any, you know, piece of entertainment, art, what have you, to stand the test of time, it has to actually mean something. It has to be coming from an authentic or place that, you know, can sort of stand the test of time and pass metal.
Did you get feedbacks from the White House?
Well, I mean, what's interesting is that I've heard so many different things from inside DC. A lot of people would say, oh, it would never work like that, it could never happen like that. But from what I understand, everyone in Washington does watch the show. So there are elements, you know, it's obviously it's in hypercolor, it's a you know, sort of technicolor version of reality, but there are elements of truth in House of Cards that have hit a nerve with everybody. So that's really a testament to how well it's
done. They didn't call and say, hey.
No, but I think Obama just spoke about it at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So it's definitely in the zeitgeist. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Who's got the best question?
I got it. In first of all, in Tel Aviv University, and in House of Cards, there's quite a few directors. So does that affect your writing, or because the script is already ready, so it's just sealed and how it goes and goes?
Oh, it's a really good question. I mean, the relationship between writer and director is very interesting because you have unbelievably talented, smart directors working on all these shows, especially House of Cards, and some of them come in and just really want to work very symbiotically with the writer, and you can have a great working relationship, and they can sort of help each other make it, elevate the material. Some directors come in and really just want to be left alone. You know, a lot of film directors aren't used to working with writers at all, so it's kind of irritating that you have a writer on set that's telling you how to do your job, which you're not really supposed to do, but, you know, can be perceived that way, of course. So it depends on the writer-director combo, but I think in the best situations, directors really help to elevate the material, but do respect that ultimately what's on the page is the story, and that they're not going to sort of reinvent the wheel by directing something outside of the box.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.